Well, we've got a real bang-bang show tonight. Rob Gutro, old pal, is back for his 5th appearance, this time talking about his latest book, Ghosts of the Birdcage Theater, on a Medium's Vacation. I bought the book myself, as always. I read it within 2 days, and great read. I thought it was even better. I love Rob's books, Pets in the Afterlife. I thought this might be one of his better books as well, so strongly suggest you check it out. We'll have links in the show notes as well as on the website. It's affiliate links, by the way, so I may get a commission, but hey, nothing wrong with that. And also a special thank you to Ruthie Larkin, a.k.a. the Beantown Medium. Ruthie helped me recently by making herself available and doing a medical scan of my youngest daughter to help me kind of diagnose something. So, Ruthie, thank you for making time for me. You are spot on as always, and I appreciate your skills and your friendship. Thank you so much.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Now, something interesting happened on this podcast, and perhaps it's because I'm talking to a medium, but there were several instances I noted, actually almost 20 minutes in, where I started noticing some voices bleeding through, very subtle. At first, I thought it might have come from my audio coming over on Rob's track, because all of these were on Rob's audio track, but that wasn't the case. There were probably a dozen or more, but I only kept the ones that I thought were I could really make out. So throughout this podcast, you will hear me stop and point out a couple of EVPs. Now, you may hear them on the track while I'm talking. I did amplify them a little bit. But anyways, I thought it was interesting, and I checked several times, and I did not say what was said. So you'll hear about 7 instances of this, which is pretty cool. So stay tuned. Don't let it detract from your listening experience, but I will point out a couple times throughout this podcast where an EVP bled through, and it was not Rob, and it was not me. We are here with good buddy Rob Gutro, and Rob has been on the show 4 times before, so that name may sound familiar, and he's responsible for about 10,000 downloads of my first couple years doing this podcast. So it's always a pleasure having Rob on the show. Rob, how you doing?
I am doing great, and I'm very happy to be back.
Yeah, I always love having you. We're going to spend a lot of time. You just wrote a book called Ghosts of the Birdcage Theater on a Medium's Vacation. We're going to go into that for most of this podcast, but first, I just want you, for the few people that have been living under a rock and haven't heard you on this show, do you mind giving an introduction of yourself to our new listeners?
Oh, not at all. So for anybody that doesn't know who I am a medium and a paranormal investigator, and in my daytime job, I'm a scientist. I'm a meteorologist. So I use energy to explain the paranormal.
Yeah, that's great. And you've also known as, on 2 of my episodes, the Pet Psychic. You've written a series called Pets in the Afterlife, which were very popular episodes. And so you wear many hats. You do the Pet Psychic readings. You are an investigator with inspired ghost tracking and an author. And all this after dark, after you finish your daytime job.
Yeah, that's right. And that's all thanks to coffee.
Yep. And once in a while you get to go on vacation, but even when you go on vacation, it ends up being a work, even if it's somewhat enjoyable with the paranormal. So do you mind introducing us to the subject of your latest book, The Birdcage in Tombstone, Arizona? For people who aren't familiar with that location, tell us a little bit about it and what drew you there.
Sure. Well, the Birdcage Theater is a very popular historic destination. It's now a museum, used to be an active theater. I will tell you, though, that the reason the Birdcage exists is because the town of Tombstone, Arizona, was actually founded in the 1870s when there was a silver miner who was out there trying to strike it rich, finding a silver mine, and the folks from Camp Huachuca told him that he would find nothing but his tombstone. So when he struck silver in 1877, he called the mine Tombstone, and then the town developed around it.
And that town is known for a very famous gunfight, correct?
It is the shootout near the OK Corral. It was actually near it, believe it or not, with Wyatt Earp, Virgil Earp, and Doc Holliday, and Morgan Earp. Yeah, versus the Cowboys. That's actually what inspired me to go there, Bob. I saw the movie Tombstone with Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell back in 1993, and I said, I am fascinated by Wyatt Earp. I have got to go there and check it out.
And the first time you went there, it was before you kind of nurtured your ability, correct? So you didn't really have any experiences. It was only on your later visit, which is the subject of this book, that just a lot of stuff happened, right?
Yeah, that's right. Back in 1994, my abilities as a medium lay dormant. They were not awakened until about 21 years later in 2005 with my puppy Buzz. So I went there and I kind of blocked everything out, unconsciously, if you would.
And you made an acquaintance, though, a friend there your first time, right? And if I remember correctly from the book, there was kind of a paranormal inspiration for you writing this book when you did.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So the way I wanted to see this town was kind of wacky, because I like doing kind of wacky things. So back in 1994, I was able to convince a friend of mine, my friend John, to visit the town with me for the very first time. And I went dressed up as Wyatt Earp. He went dressed as Doc Holliday. And we walked the town that way. And when we got to the Birdcage Theater, the guy who was managing it, who still manages it today, his name is Billy Hunley, he asked where we were from. And we told him, East Coast. And he said, I can't believe the two Yankees would dress up like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday and go into Tombstone. So he was so impressed that we befriended him, and I stayed in touch with him all these years.
There was a paranormal influence that inspired you. You've been meaning to do this book for a while, but you've done so many books, there's certain ones that you put on hold. There was something that happened and kind of something that reached out to you that made you decide now is the time, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So Billy, the gentleman that manages the Birdcage Theater, lost his father in November of 2021. And I have been holding on to these encounters that I had in 2019 for a while. And finally, I felt nudged to write this. So I contacted Billy and his wife, and I said, would it be okay if I put this book together? And they were thrilled by it. And I had found out that his dad died, so I dedicated the book to his dad.
Oh, that's excellent. You didn't pick up, I read the book, you didn't pick up on him there. Have you ever picked up on anything from his dad, or just an intuition that maybe he would be pleased that you did the book?
It was just a kind of a nudge from spirit that actually, from his dad's spirit, that nudged me to write the book.
The Birdcage Theater, there's a lot of residual energy there, right? I think the building is mostly original. Is a lot of the furniture still there, kind of intact from the 1800s?
Well, there's a lot of furniture from the 1800s. It may not be the original furniture that was in the Birdcage, but the Birdcage is now a museum. So back in 1881, the Birdcage officially opened on Christmas Eve. And then from 1881 to 1889, that theater operated continuously 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And I could tell you what was going on in it.
Oh, God. Tell us.
Okay. Well, in addition to live performances, they had actors and jugglers and singers and dancers and all kinds of things. But in the basement of the Birdcage Theater, there was a poker game. And that poker game actually ran continuously. And I can talk about that a little bit later when we address the ghosts down there. But so that poker game was going on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Plus, the Birdcage was also known as a place for ladies of the evening. And, they worked overnight. So the Birdcage never closed. Not until 1889 when all the mines flooded and the town, ironically, the town dried up.
Well, that must have been really competitive poker players to last for 8+ years or whatever, because usually there's a really bad player like myself that loses his money right away. So that's interesting. That's got to be in the Guinness Book of World Records, or it should be.
It actually is. Yeah.
Oh,
At first when I heard that, I thought, that's one long bathroom break.
I thought that too, actually.
What they did is whenever somebody got up, they would actually tip the chair against the table and they would play around. So if he didn't come back in time, he would just miss his turn and then he would come back. And then every time somebody was tired, another person was waiting in the wings to join that poker.
Wow. That's amazing. So there's a ton of residual energy there.
There is.
Give us a little background on residual energy. I think residual energy are like thought forms or tulpas, kind of like memories that are ingrained into the furniture of the walls and picked up and they replay for certain people. Do they pick us or do we select them? Who's more responsible for the residual energy being replayed when someone goes into a place like that?
So residual energy is indeed like a thumbprint on a pane of glass. So that's the way I look at it. If people have a lot of emotions, and there's a lot of emotions in there because there were a lot of performers. There were poker games and so forth. People were accused of cheating. 26 people were murdered in the Birdcage Theater. So what happens is when we have emotions like that, they get soaked into the walls. When we bring our own living emotion, our own energy, that energy comes out of the walls, if you will, and we can see it replayed as an image over and over, same thing, or we can hear things that had happened before during those emotional periods. So that's really what residual energy is. And if you think about that thumbprint, Bob, on a window, when you shine light through it and add energy, you can see it.
I think there's like 6 females and roughly 4 males that are kind of the tally of the ghosts there. Is that accurate?
There are only a certain number that I met, but I think that there are more. So overall, 26 people were estimated killed in the Birdcage. But if you go in the Birdcage Theater, and you can tour it, it is a museum during the day, and at night they do actually now offer ghost tours. If you look up or look at the walls, you can see up to 140 bullet holes.
Wow. So we're going to go into some of these stories from the book in a minute. I just we've talked about residual energy. Can you talk briefly, in the book you give an overview of why ghosts exist. Can you give us a brief primer on that before we talk about some of the spirits that you encountered with your friend Dan?
Absolutely. So when we die, the energy that is within us couples with memories, personality, and knowledge. And we either choose to stay at a fixed location that we're familiar with, or that we died in or performed at, if you will, or lived in. Or we cross over and join the energies of heaven, the cosmos, and that's what I call a spirit. So the people that chose to stay here in the Birdcage Theater as ghosts were either actors, gamblers, or murder victims. And there are a couple of other people that are kind of unknown, or ladies of the evening. Those are that's the role, if you will.
Wow. And do you pick up, you certainly pick up, we're going to talk in a minute about Jerome. You certainly can pick up how they die, but how much of their backstory are you able to get? Do they ever try to tell you what happened to them, or how much do they communicate to you, typically a ghost, when you go to a place like this?
So sometimes they do share more of their backstory. Other times they just want you to know that they are there and what happened to them. And sometimes they want you to help them cross over. In the case of these ghosts, because I was actually on a ghost tour at night, it was, I think it was like a 2-hour tour or a 3-hour tour. We kept kind of moving on. So some of the ghosts were not able to convey more of their story. But I did get quite a number of stories from them. Some shared their pain of violent deaths. The book contains photographs of 2 ghost faces, one in a painting and one in a mirror. And I sketched some of the other ones.
Yeah. What I really loved about this book, Rob, and I think I told you before we started, you always do a great job anyways. I've read several of your books, but I thought this one was really well written. I think what happened, why I liked it so much, because it really tells a story of how your visit unfolded. Each chapter leads kind of as a teaser into the next one. of experiences that you and your friend Dan had. So let's just start with a couple of these. Let's just talk about, I think there's a painting of Fatima or something in there, and there was an image that came off of that. Do you mind sharing that story?
No, absolutely not. So back in 1994, when I first visited, there's a giant picture of Fatima. And Fatima was a belly dancer who performed in the Birdcage Theater in the 1880s. She became famous, and she actually wound up getting much more famous after she performed at the Birdcage Theater, and she moved on. So after she moved on and achieved such fame, this giant painting that hangs in the lobby was sent to the Birdcage Theater as a gift, kind of a thank you. So I'm not sure about the exact measurements, but it is huge. So it struck me as something that's at least between 7 and 9 feet high and probably about 3 or 4 feet wide. So take that in mind when I'm describing it. And it's a picture of Fatima with like a giant curtain behind her. So in 1994, when I went there, I asked Billy, the gentleman that manages the Birdcage Theater, to stand in front of it. When I took that picture, I took it with no flash. It was a 35 millimeter camera, if you remember those. And I didn't think anything of it. So I sent him a copy. I mailed him a copy. Yes, I mailed it. This was before email was, a real big thing.
Yep.
And when he got it, he called me immediately. And he said, "Rob, I need you to pull that picture out." So I said, "Okay." So I went and got it. I pulled it out. And he said, "I want you to look at the bottom half of that picture." He said, "You have captured the face of the actor, the male actor that I see walk across the stage almost every night when I am closing the Birdcage Theater."
Yeah, and that was like a glare. Was that like a glare in the photo or something, Rob, that you took, or?
No, actually it was. Yeah, so that people thought that it could be a glare if you look at it. And the thing was, Bob, that I did not use a flash. I distinctly remember not using a flash. So if you look at the picture, it looks like the face of a man who is bald on top, maybe with a big thick mustache and a beard. The face looks almost skeletal to me. But Billy said that is actually the face of the actor that crosses that stage. So in 2019, when I came back, it was around the same time of day. Sun was in the same position. I took a picture of that painting, and there was absolutely nothing to indicate anything would ever show up on the bottom of that painting.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is an Afraid of Nothing Paranormal Podcast Alert.
$10 merch. $10 merch.
That's right, podcast fans. If you go to our website, afraidofnothingpodcast.com, and click on the store tab, you too can find now $10 merch on the website. So not only can you get the great stuff like the hoodies and the t-shirts and the blankets and the glasses, you can also get stickers and bumper stickers and, well, a whole lot more. You need to see it yourself. But just remember this.
$10 merch
is now available at the Afraid of Nothing podcast store. Check it out. And remember, never be afraid to look good.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, we should tell the listeners that we'll be talking about stuff, but you got to get the book because there's the photos are in there. We can actually see for themselves, and there's a lot of drawings that you did as well that kind of depicted things. And so, in the book, I just read it. I told Rob I read it like the past couple nights. I devoured it. It's very reasonably priced. I got it on Kindle for $4.99. You can get the paperback for like $7.99 on Amazon. I'll have a link for my affiliate link, which I do get a commission if they buy it from me, but buy it wherever you want to buy it because it's definitely worth it. But if you enjoy listening to this episode, listeners, you definitely want to get the book because there's some great visuals that we'll be talking about that you'll go, oh my God, that's what they were talking about.
Thank you, Bob. And the other thing, too, is that if you ever plan a visit to Arizona and you want to go to the old mining town of Tombstone, and, whether it be for the history of Wyatt Earp or the mining experience there, or just to see what a town looks like preserved as it was in the 1880s. This would be a cool book to have because you can actually go on the same ghost tour that I went on, and you very well may run into one of these ghosts.
Yeah, and one of those ghosts was named Jerome, and hopefully they don't have the same experience you had because it was kind of a painful one, correct?
Yeah, that was probably my craziest and most shocking experience in the Birdcage Theater. And I actually drew a I drew a picture of him, rather, that was like a photograph in my mind of him being shot in the throat. So what happens with ghosts sometimes is that when they run into mediums like me, they communicate by sharing their pain of death. And this guy died a pretty horrible death. So after we got through the lobby part where there was a woman, a female ghost, we walked right into the theater area. When you go into the Birdcage Theater, there is a big lobby, and then behind the lobby, part of the lobby is walled off, and you can go through a door to get to where the theater area used to be, the seating area. And that's exactly where I met Jerome.
Now, when you're going through this, are you a silent sufferer? Will you just keep it in, or was your friend Dan or others aware that you were in pain at that time?
So Dan wondered what was going on because I was trying to make a noise. So my friend Dan lives in Arizona, and he said yes to come with me for a ghost tour. He had never had a paranormal experience before. And that night on that ghost tour, he actually saw 2 ghosts.
Wow.
And he took a photograph of one, and I sketched the other one in the book. So we walked in this area, and suddenly this ghost, this male ghost, made me feel like I was shot in the throat with a bullet, of course.
Okay, EVP number 1 says, of course. Of course.
Of course. Of course. Of course. I heard him talking in my head, and he told me that he died on that very spot where I was standing. And Bob, when I got shot in the throat, I couldn't speak. I tried. Nothing would come out. I felt myself like gagging, almost like drowning in my own blood in my throat. And I thought, what happened here? What's going on? And he told me his name was Jerome, and he told me that he was shot right there in the throat.
Was it as a result of a poker game, Rob?
You know, I haven't been able to figure that out. I was actually kind of in shock when I got shot in the throat. I was just trying to figure out what was going on. And because I couldn't get my voice, Bob, for about 2 minutes, Dan came over to me and he said, "Are you okay?" And I couldn't, like I said, I couldn't speak. And then the tour guide, the woman who was leading the tour, she came over to me and she said, "Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" And finally I was able to speak and say, "No, I'm a medium. And there's a male ghost here, and he was shot in the throat." And she said, "That's unbelievable because there was a man here in history that was shot in the throat right where you're standing."
And didn't he do it to you again the next day or something? One of these stories that happened twice in a row, right? Or
Yeah, so he did. So before I tell you about that, though, when I got home, I had to look this up. And I found in the Journal of Maxillofacial and Oral Surgery, there was an article about gunshot injury in the neck. And it confirmed that a shot in the neck could be fatal. So I needed to make sure that, what I was feeling was actually true.
Yeah.
It's a scientist in me. So you're right. The next day, during the day, because I know Billy and his wife, Dan and I stayed in a hotel, and then we came back the next day and we had breakfast with them, and they took us back into the birdcage because Billy wanted to take me into a particular room that's off limits to the public because he had an encounter in there. And sure enough, I had an encounter in there too. But then they walked us back toward the stage again. And darn it, as soon as they opened that door, there was Jerome shooting me in the throat again. And I stopped in my tracks. And they looked at me and they said, "Are you okay?" Because they weren't there that night before. And I couldn't talk. And I was pointing to my throat. And Dan said, "Oh my gosh, it's the guy that shot him in the throat last night."
Were you and Dan dressed up? Were you dressed up for the time period, like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, or was this when you did it 20 years before? Were you in costume that night, or?
No, this was in 2019. We were dressed as
Okay. I was wondering if that triggered it, Rob. That's all. You were on another episode that's very popular called Inspired Ghost Tracking, and there was a double murder thing where you and another guy both felt how someone got murdered. And it makes me wonder, what is it with ghosts where they want you to know and feel the pain of how they die? Is it, do they experience this over and over like a kind of a Groundhog's Day thing? Or what's the deal about that? Why do they share it with people like you?
I think that they remember it, certainly, but it's one of the only ways that they can convey their identity because they want us to know who they are.
Yeah. Does that require a tremendous amount of energy for them to do that? Was it really cold around you when that happened?
It does require a tremendous amount of energy, and we brought in a tremendous amount of emotional energy. We were both in awe on this ghost tour, and we were a little anxious, both of us. Dan had never had a paranormal experience, so he was very anxious, and that just gave him enough energy.
Now, we're going to talk about a couple more stories there. EVP number 2 is a bit odd. It says, ouch, don't talk about myself like that. About a couple more stories there. There was another one where you felt a bullet, and that was Shot Against the Wall is the chapter in your book. Do you mind sharing that? EVP number 3 seems to agree with Rob. It says, truth. There was another one where you...
No, not at all. That was another shocking one. So I am happy to say that those were the two most shocking physical experiences I had in the birdcage. And that's not to say that, anybody that's not sensitive wouldn't feel those, but you may not feel them quite as bluntly as I did if you go in there. And if you're not sensitive, you won't even know what you're walking through. So the Birdcage Theater ghost tour starts from the lobby, goes through the theater area, then it goes to the backstage, and then it goes downstairs. And we already mentioned that in the basement, that was the site of the longest poker game. Also in the basement, there are what's called cribs. Those are small rooms, like 4 or 5 rooms with doors where ladies of the evening work. And they work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that downstairs, that basement area probably gets a lot more activity than the upstairs. So as we were going downstairs, I was on a landing, and there was like one more part of the staircase to go. Suddenly, I felt a bullet go right through my chest, and I was pushed right against the wall of the staircase. And again, I couldn't get my breath. And the tour guide was down there, and she looked at me and she said, uh-oh. And she said, you must have experienced the man that was shot on the stairs. I said, that's exactly what I felt.
So I have to ask you, Rob, now that you've been shot in the throat and shot in the chest, which is the worst?
I think probably shot in the throat because you can't talk about it.
Yeah. Wow. I give you credit because I would not have the kahungas to walk through. I'd be wincing and flinching every time I turned a corner when I went to a place like that.
Yeah, well, I didn't really know what to expect, and the reason is because back in like you said, back in 1994 when I was first there and I wasn't feeling anything, my abilities hadn't developed. I didn't experience anything. So this last visit in 2019, where I had all of these encounters, I think I had 11 encounters with 11 different ghosts.
Wow.
In this particular book.
Is that like the most? I mean, you've been to England. There's a book you did about England. Is that the most activity you had in such a condensed time period?
It's either the most or it comes close, because in my book, Ghosts and Spirits Explained, there's a Maryland mansion that is haunted by, I think, 10 or 11 different ghosts. So, yeah, it's right up there for most activity.
Wow. Now, every good haunting has like a lady in white, and this place didn't disappoint. So you want to talk about the woman in white that you saw there?
Sure. That was actually called kind of a surprise, too, because at the end of the ghost tour, the tour guide takes everybody back upstairs And they have tables set up, tables and chairs, and you sit there behind the curtain, the giant curtain that says Tombstone on it. And she gives you about half an hour, 45 minutes, turns all the lights off, says, you ask questions, see if you can get an answer from a ghost. So it's kind of like a seance. They call it a seance behind the curtain. So everybody was there. It was very dark. There was only like an emergency light in the corner. And it was at this particular part of the tour that my friend Dan saw a ghost walk away from him.
Oh, wow. I remember that. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, we were able to confirm that ghost. But so we could barely see the tables across the other side of the stage because it was so dark. And there was a woman at the other table afar from me, and she said, "I feel really cold." Well, I looked over there, and standing behind her was a woman in white. She was wearing totally white clothing, like big white dress. And I think at one point she had a white veil on. And she said to me, she said to the group, she said, "There's something touching my hand." And I said, "There's a woman standing behind you, and she's wearing white. And she's very close to you, so it's very likely her that's touching your hand." And she was kind of freaked out. She said, "Well, what is she doing there?" So I asked the woman in white why she had chosen to stand next to that particular woman that was there, and she said that she and the woman, the living woman, actually share the same birthday. So she thought because they share the same birthday, she would be easiest to talk to out of everybody that was in the crowd.
Did she say what date her birthday was, or did you ask the woman what her birthday was? Or
I did not.
Yeah.
No, I did not, because honestly, when the lights came on, I couldn't even place which woman it was because she was sitting in the dark.
Now, did the tour guide say that this was one of the most active tours that they went through, or is this kind of normal for the Birdcage Museum?
Well, she said it's usually pretty active, but it's not common that there's a medium that joins the tour. So she said every ghost I ran into, all 11 of them, she was actually able to confirm by experiences that people in the past had shared with her. So that's pretty cool.
That is very cool. Your friend Dan, his first time, no paranormal experiences before that. Does he want to hang out with you all the time now to go ghost hunting, or is like once enough? Did it kind of like change his perception on ghosts in the afterlife?
Well, he was a little unnerved at first, but he thought it was kind of cool afterward. And this is actually an experience that we had after we left the Birdcage that I did not put in the book, but I really do tie it to something paranormal.
Yeah, love to hear it.
So Dan and I had Dan lives in Arizona. He lives in the Phoenix area. So we drove down to Tombstone in his truck, and he had a relatively new battery in the truck. So after the ghost tour, it was 11:30. We walked back to the truck, and the battery was dead. Now, he looked at me and he said, "This is a pretty new battery. I don't get it." So I explained to him that ghosts are energy and that there are a lot in this town. Actually, one walked through me on the way back to the truck. And I said I wouldn't be surprised if they just sapped the energy of the battery. So he said, "Okay, well, it's 11:30 at night. We're in Tombstone. What do we do?" So I called AAA because I have AAA, and they said, "Well, the closest AAA is in Tucson. It would take us an hour and a half to get there." So I'm like, that's too long. So what we did is we went over to the sheriff's office, which we walked to it, of course, which was about 3 blocks away. Fortunately, there was a convenience store open. We asked somebody where it was. We knocked on the door, and I got to tell you, even real life people can scare the crap out of you. Because the sheriff that opened the door, he had to be 6'6", and he was like 200 pounds of muscle. And he said, "What can I do for you guys?" And I was like, "Dan, you talk to him." So Dan told him that the battery died and all that. And he says, "Okay, I can give you a jump." So I said, should we wait for you and you drive us over? And he said, no, just tell me where it is. You guys can walk over. I'm like, okay, whatever you want. You're a lot bigger than I am. Long story short, he jumped the battery. We were able to drive to, I think it was like a 24-hour Walmart or something, and they had one battery left.
There's a little bit of karma there.
Yeah, so that was kind of scary. But yeah, so if you go to that town, be aware that there are ghosts that are actually walking outside and up and down the streets. Because like I said, one walked through me, and that was another story.
What does that feel like when one walks through you? Is it like, does it take your breath away, or what's it like?
So have you ever seen the CBS comedy show Ghosts?
No, I'm sad to say I should, because I have a paranormal podcast. I've heard great things about it. I just haven't watched it yet. But
okay, it's really funny. So in the show, there are a whole bunch of ghosts in this mansion. When a living person walks through a ghost, they're jarred and they kind of dissipate for a minute, and then they put themselves back together. And that's kind of like what it feels for me when a ghost walks through me. It knocks me for a loop. And it chills me to the bone because they take the heat of my body.
Now, do they do that intentionally to get energy from you, or do they just don't care? They're just walking through you and do they not see you? Or why do you think that happens?
I honestly don't know if it's intentional, but that's just the result of what happens when they walk through me.
Now, in your book, you mentioned that ghosts derive, emotional energy from negative emotions. Is that because negative emotions vibrate on a lower frequency, and that's, versus higher positive thoughts? Or why is it the negative emotions that attract spirits or ghosts?
I haven't been able to figure that out per se. All I know is that the negative energy is something that's linked to Earth, and that positive energy is linked to the other side.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering why negative, it's more kind of lower vibration, more toward thicker mass or whatever. What happens when a place like the Birdcage Theater Museum ceases to exist, God forbid? Where do the ghosts go?
That is a fantastic question. And I found the answer to that out in my Ghosts of England book when I had that adventure. And what I came to find out is that when a building or a structure is razed where ghosts inhabit it, they actually seek out the next nearest structure.
Really? Interesting. Wow. EVP number 4 was interesting. At first I thought it said true, like EVP number 3, but when I listened closer, it said help, which is repeated later on during my conversation with Rob. Interesting. In England, there's a lot of old places nearby each other, I guess. That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, there are. So for the people that live in a new house and there's a ghost in there, that's likely why.
Huh.
If you build a house on a property that never had a house on it before or never had anything before, other than being maybe an ancient settlement or an encampment or something like that is long forgotten in history and that somebody was attached to, it's most likely a ghost has moved into your home from another house nearby.
I think the Lizzie Borden house in Massachusetts, there was a house next door before all that stuff happened where there may have been some rumors about that. We've covered your Pets in the Afterlife series on a few episodes. Do you have any future books in the works for that? You're always doing readings and you always have great testimonials. I know a couple people personally that have consulted you and told me, oh my God, the guy's amazing. Have you had any kind of blow your mind stories recently that you care to share that you're not going to put in your next book?
Oh gosh. So there's a lot. Yeah. So I do readings every weekend and every weekend I get a lot of confirmations back. So yes, to answer your first question, yes, there will be another Pets in the Afterlife book. I've got all the stories for it. I just have to edit it and put it together. It's Pets in the Afterlife 4. It is Messages from Spirit Cats. I have to give cats equal time.
Okay.
And then there will be a 5 because I've already got enough stories for a 5. I am working with a therapist to put together a chapter on grief, on her ideas of coping with grief, because there is a chapter in 3 about how to cope with grief from a medical psychologist who is a friend of mine. So lots of pets coming up. So yeah, there are quite a few stories that actually stand out that I did. I will tell you just one. There was a Great Dane that a woman had written me about. And she said, what is one thing that stands out in the memory of my Great Dane? And, that could be anything. So I asked Great Dane, I said, what one thing that do you always remember? And he told me, he said he only got muddy once. He fell in the mud and he came in the house loaded up with mud. But it only happened once in his entire life. So I wrote that to her, and she wrote me back, and she said, "Oh my God, that is absolutely right." She said, when we were at my mother's house, our dog went out in the backyard and got into kind of a swampy area and came back in my mother's house covered in mud. But it only happened once in his entire life.
God. Yeah, I really encourage people to read books 1 to 3. One of my friends, Dan Miller, was in, I think, book 3. And it also was inspired by what was the podcast? Was it Unsolved Mysteries that you were featured
Yes.
on? Yeah, it's just it was a great episode as well. So I really encourage them to go check your prior Pets in the Afterlife series 1 to 3. You know, the next book that I want to read, you did a while ago, but I think that I want to get is Kindred Spirits. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about Ed, who he is, and is he still around? And has he ever traveled with you on vacation?
Sure. And the answer to that question is yes. He has traveled with us on vacation. So Ed is somebody I never knew in life. He died in 1996, and I didn't know him. But he was my husband's partner back in the 90s. And when I met my husband, Tom, Ed showed up too. So Ed has been along for the ride for the entire 16 plus years that we've been together. And it's funny that, as a medium, you get to communicate with people on the other side. And when they're close to somebody that you're close to, sometimes they come around a lot. And that's actually what's happened with Ed. So Ed has shared all kinds of quirky things with me about his and Tom's time together, things that I couldn't know, things that I wouldn't know. And then I tell Tom, and he said, "I need you to stop talking to Ed."
Funny. So, hey, I know you've crossed spirits over. Obviously, sounds like Ed doesn't want to do that. Is he waiting for you and Tom to then go together to heaven together, or what's your thought about that?
Oh, no. So he has crossed over. So that actually, because he's crossed over, that enables him to go anywhere.
Oh,
anytime.
he's a spirit, not a ghost. Okay, got it. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
Okay, he's a spirit.
Okay.
So in Kindred Spirits, you'll read how Ed was there and confirmed for us that he was there every time one of our dogs passed away.
Wow.
You'll also read about how he saved Tom and I in England when we got lost at sundown. And he sent somebody that looks exactly as he would have appeared had he lived today. And it freaked us both out like crazy.
Oh, my God. Oh, my. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, he solved the mystery of his own death. And I was able to finally get his dad comfort after 15 years.
So that sounds just like Ghost. That sounds like a sitcom, actually, right there. That sounds like, Ed sounds like it would be a great kind of Kindred Spirit. Sounds like that would be a great sitcom at some point.
Yeah, it very well could be. Tom keeps saying it should be a movie. And to be honest with you, Bob, I'm already 80 pages into Kindred Spirits too, because Ed continues to come around.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it does sound like a movie or a series. It's a great premise. That gives me a good segue. I told you before the call, sometimes I'm a guest on a show, and I was on a guest called Coffin Talk. And that's where the host interviews guests from all walks of life. They could be therapists, they could be spiritual, even just his friends that he knew from college or atheists. He asked them about their beliefs and their philosophies about living, death, and dying. Mm-hmm. Several people believe nothing happens, that it's like like when we go to sleep every night. One guy said, I die every night, so I'm not afraid of it. I just happen to, when I wake up, it's just like, I realize, I've got another go at this. And then even there's some people that don't believe have interesting things. One guy quoted Keanu Reeves. I forget what show he was on. EVP number 5 doesn't sound like a dog, but it does sound like woof. Forget who. But someone asked him, what do you think is going to happen when you die? And he said, people who love me will miss me, which is a great thought, right?
Sure.
But what are your thoughts? I mean, you certainly interact with spirits and ghosts. Has your belief in the afterlife and what happened, has it evolved over the years? Have you ever had doubt, or are you pretty much convinced now about what happens?
I'm pretty much convinced. As a scientist, I believe that energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed. So the ghosts that I've communicated with on Earth and the spirits that have crossed over are proof enough to me that there is a life after the physical one. And that is very reassuring to me. People have asked me also about religions, and I try to explain to them that whenever I talk to spirits or ghosts, they never mention religions, which I find very interesting. It's really about the personal connections.
And do you believe in reincarnation, about coming back, or do you think it's one go here and then you go on to other astral travels? EVP number 6 is actually a string of EVPs, and from what I could tell, it says, "That's true." Hey, Dave. Hey, that's true.
No, I do believe that we are all energetically recycled. So we do come back. And as I mentioned in my Pets in the Afterlife books too, is that our pets wait for us in spirit until it's our time. And then because of the love that we share with them, just like the people that we belong to, we all come back at the same time.
Really? So your pets come back with you in your next life?
Absolutely.
EVP number 7, a little bit odd in context of what we're talking about, says help. For some reason, someone says help. Really? So your pets come back with you in your next life? That's amazing. Yeah, in all of our interviews, I don't remember you saying that, but that's great. Do they come back as pets, or they ever come back as humans and you're a dog?
They tend to stay in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
So, although they may not be pets to us in the next life, we will meet them in some form in the next life. But I don't think that it's been my experience, actually, that people do not become animals in the next life and animals do not become people. The way that I reason that is, how many times do you find your coworkers sitting at their desk licking their hands like a cat?
Yeah.
Or smelling someone's tail, if you will. That would not be a good thing.
So funny. Now, your bio at the end of the book says you collect comic books, and these are usually superhero, not horror, I assume. So what are some of your prized comic books?
I do collect comic books. So one of my favorite superheroes is actually the Spectre, believe it or not. He's a murdered policeman who came back as the avenging ghost.
Oh, that's a great one.
To fight crime. Yeah, he's been around since the 1940s, and he was actually created by one of the same guys that created Superman in the 1930s.
Huh.
I didn't know that until recently. So yeah, and of course Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash.
Did you see the latest Batman movie, Rob?
I have not seen it yet, but I plan to.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. I've heard really good things about it. So last comic question is, are there any current comics that you recommend? Are there any series that you're reading now that you really like, or do you tend to stick with more of the classics?
No, there are a couple of them that I still collect. I like Swamp Thing, of course. And I like Nightwing, which is Batman's Robin all grown up with a new identity. So those are two of my favorites.
Excellent. So let's close on, let's just talk about maybe a couple of books that you also would like to recommend here and promote, and anything else that you'd like to promote if you're going to be any Comic Cons or where people can follow you.
Oh, gosh. I highly recommend that folks pick up my Ghosts of England on a Medium's Vacation book, because if you like the Birdcage Theater book, you'll love the Ghosts of England book. And there will be more in the series on a Medium's Vacation. I can assure you of that. So speaking of the Birdcage Theater, I have been invited to Tombstone, Arizona. I've been invited back for Wyatt Earp Days, which is at the end of May in 2022, to talk about the book and do a book signing. So people can meet me there, and I'm going to be on the Ghost Tour too. So nothing like doing it in person.
So people haven't seen Rob. Rob usually is clean shaven, but he has this very wild Tom Selleck on steroids type of mustache going on right now. So you're going to keep the mustache for another month, Rob?
Yeah, I call it my Wyatt Earp mustache because I love Wyatt Earp, and I grew it when I went out to Tombstone, and I'm going to keep it appropriately for Tombstone. And by the way, Bob, on the cover of Ghosts of the Birdcage Theater, that is a picture of me in 1994 dressed up as Wyatt Earp with my Wyatt Earp mustache. So that's an actual photograph of me from 7 years back. Yeah.
The cover is clever because it's like it incorporates the sign of the birdcage into the title of the book. So it's just kind of interesting how you did that. It says like ghosts of the, and it's like Birdcage Theater. You see the sign on a mediumfication. It was very clever, and you're underneath the sign. So great job on it, Rob, as always. It was a really good read. I recommend people to check it out. Thank you, as always, for your time. I know we both want to, today is Tuesday, April 12th, and our mutual friend, my sometimes co-host, Kyle Carvin, is on the 6th episode of There's Something About Pam, and I know we want to just watch that later on tonight, but I appreciate you taking this hour with me, and you always do great work, so it's always fun talking to you.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you next time.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout-out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.